Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Bit of a husky voice for me today, still getting over some sickness, but I couldn't wait any longer. I need to talk about a book that I'd recently read, finished, discussed and poured over for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. And also, have to say, it's a bit of a doozy, bit of a chunker. It's Curse of the Mistwraith by Janny Wurts. This book is book 1 in an 11 book series, which is about to be finished. It's published, or about to publish its last entry in the series, and has been going on for many years. This book here is something else. Now, we read this at a very slow pace as part of a group read with a lot of us over page 2 in forums. We discussed it at length every 4 chapters, and oh my god, the depth of this book, the beauty of this book cannot be understated. But where do you start? Let's start a bit with a plot. The plot really centres around 2 young men. They're half brothers, and they very much conform to this idea of the wars of light and shadow. With the stepbrothers, one represents light and has powers in light, and one represents shadow and represents shadow. And these 2 men, Lysair and Arathon, are at the start of the book very much at loggerheads. Their races, their tribes, their people are at war, in a long-running war, and Arathon is captured at the very start of the book. Spoiler for the first 20 pages or so. From there, they end up in a splinter kingdom where they are forging their destiny, which has sort of already been foretold. That is pretty much all of the setup plot-wise that you need. 2 boys, wars of light and shadow. Light and shadow will bring an end to the Mistwraith. First book is called Curse of the Mistwraith. There you go. So why should you read Curse of the Mistwraith? Well, if you think about some of the great books that are celebrated both in our community and worldwide around the literary greats in terms of writing, people talk about Malazan, people talk about Erickson, people talk about Jordan, people talk about Tolkien, people talk about Guy Gabriel Kay, Robin Hobb. These people all sort of write what I call elevator prose. A lot of people in the fantasy genre, I think the bar is quite high for entry. Everybody has to be able to write descriptively very well, regardless of your endpoint, for people to get anything out of the genre, I think, for fantasy. So if you don't write descriptively well, you can't really convey the beauty of the world, the setup, all of that stuff that goes with it. Yet there are a few writers that just have that bit extra, that bit something else that digs into. And some people would look at this and go, oh god, that makes those books heavy to read. I would certainly agree in some ways that Jordan is... I would agree that Jordan is somewhat heavy to read sometimes. He sometimes takes overly long to describe what's happening, etc. I haven't read Malazan, but from talking about people who've read this book and Malazan, there is an acceptance, I think, that this level of prose, rather than being deep, rather than being complicated or over the top, it's rewarding. And it's rewarding in the sense that everything's there. Everything's told in there, and I don't just mean in terms of in terms of telling the story or otherwise. There is a beauty and a rhythm and a description here that just is, it's in another league above a lot of fantasy novels. And what's stunning about this is that when I go into Goodreads, there aren't that many reviews for these books. These have been published and going forward for many years. And while Janny Wurts is probably most recognisable for having written the Empire series, co-authored with Richard E. Feist, adaptations coming of that, is my favourite series of all time. These are very different from those books and very written differently in style. These are, I've seen it actually described very well in a Goodreads review of this book, because they were describing it in a derogatory sense, but I actually think the metaphor they were using was quite well, or the comparison was used quite well. Anybody who listens to jazz, and you may or may not listen to jazz, one of the things about jazz is that there's a lot of noise going on. Even created by only 3-4 instruments, everybody's sort of doing their own thing, but at any one time there is one instrument that is taking precedence and that is the centre of that attention usually. And it's usually played by somebody who's a real, top of the class, top of the tree. They know exactly what they're doing. And often, if you just follow that one person, here's one of my tips for listening to jazz: listen to what that one person is doing. Everything else just fits around it. So all the other noise, all what everybody else is doing, they fit in around it. And the really great jazz albums and great jazz performances do exactly that. When all else is going to confuse and it feels a bit overwhelming, focus on the one thing. And that's what I would say about the prose here for Janny Wurts. I'm going to put some bits of quotes up as I'm talking about in this review to kind of give you a sense and highlight things like alliteration, especially at the start of the book, is prominently used to give it a rhythm, to give it a feel, to give it a thought process. Some of these are so beautiful and read so well that it kind of just sometimes just stop in the book and go, oh, isn't that wonderful? Just like the jazz, Janny's prose, when all else is think, God, there's so much going on here. There's, I have to hold on to that. I've got to think about that, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter. You just read the prose. The prose will take care of you. The story will be told very clearly through the prose. You may have a period, if you're reading this book, where you get to about 11, 12, 13, where you think, God, I'm not really sure I totally understand what's going on here. But the truth is you are. Fast forward another 2 chapters or so, you'll go, no, I do know what's going on here. Follow the prose, follow the writing, follow the effect of what's been happening to you. There are so many massive themes in here. I got out of some of this, some anti-capitalist kind of feeling. When you look at the setup of the world and the way the politics of the system work up, there's a critique here of, capitalist society, of the way that those that hold the wealth control or seek to control those that do not. There is the idea of how prejudice plays in to society and the decision making. How one simple change in prejudice can change your thought process and morph it completely. Can justify things that without prejudice would never have considered your mind, and how it can all seem reasonable, and actually how terrible actions and terrible things that happen can be born out of initial thought of following along going, no, that is the right thing to do. It's so wonderfully intricate, yet ultimately by the end of it, very simple in its baseline ideas of what it's trying to convey, but within the context of a world with a lot of going on with different factions and a lot of different people. And as the book layers and builds chapter on chapter on what these things are, you kind of get swept away, and it's like, oh, well, there's more possibilities that come there. And like I say, for a book one, there's a lot of world building that goes on, and at a certain point you can kind of go, there's been a lot, I'm not sure if I follow, but the book does kind of remind you of things as you go along, to the point where we get to a big crescendo. And the last couple of chapters of this book are stunning, stunning. I honestly, battle scenes are written differently than I ever thought. And actually, something that I didn't even point out in any of the chats, do you ever get in books where they foreshadow those things where they say something like, they foreshadow death or whatever, and they kind of say something and then spend the next 2 chapters explaining how that event came to place? Sometimes you don't need to do that, and that's one of the things that I really love about this book. It sort of respects the reader to kind of go, I don't need to tell you everything here. We can concentrate on, in that jazz idea again, this is all you need to concentrate on. This is all you need to think about. I think this book is wonderful. The characters are wonderful. The characters change and move. And one of my first feelings that I had about the book was that I would do character sheets, especially for main characters like Arathon and Lysair and some of the people in and around here. And yet that would have been just totally pointless, because these characters move and change as they grow on through life. If we think of ourselves, this version of me is very different from the 20-year-old version of me. And if somebody had done a character piece of me at 20 and they'd met me now, they would go, no, I must have the wrong person. And that very much feeds into what's happening here. For book 1 of 11, I can't wait to see where this goes and what happens next. If you've been reading along and you're wanting some encouragement or would like to discuss some of the things, because I think it is a book that bears out real discussion and real depth of thought, I'll put links to, I'll create a list to the playlist of where we discuss this every 4 chapters. So if you find this review and thinking, should I read this, should I not read it, I'm going to start reading it, I'm 4 chapters in, I've got questions, I need people to bounce ideas off, you can go check out our video. You can see the sort of struggle as we try to say what we think is going to happen, what we think has happened as we go through, and as we get towards the end, how that all resolves itself into being, oh, ain't this great. And that is my review of Curse the Mistwraith. If you didn't kind of understand, I really liked it, and I encourage everybody to read it, at least, you know, to see if it fits what they would like. But going in, know that it isn't necessarily an easy read, but it's a rewarding read. It's something that will, the more that you put into it, the more that you'll get out of it. And I look forward to discussing it with many of you over the next coming weeks, months, and possibly years. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I hope you stick around the channel. I'll stick a playlist up of some of the other reviews that I've done at the end. And thanks very much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care. All the best. Bye.